My father, the CDO of Hamilton Industries, had my entire life planned out before I could even walk. "Charlotte, darling," he said, adjusting his immaculately ironed arm suit. Being Victoria Hamilton's daughter made growing up difficult. Every breath I took and every step I took was closely watched and evaluated. Hamilton never settles for second best. Our Beverly Hills estate was a monument to that attitude, with 28 exquisitely designed rooms that exuded wealth and authority. However, to me, it felt more like a golden prison than a home, and by the time I turned 25, I had flawlessly followed my father's plan. I hold a position as a junior executive at Hamilton Industries and have graduated from Harvard Business School. There was only one minor issue. I was utterly hopelessly in love with someone else. On a soggy Tuesday morning, when my Ferrari broke down on the way to work, I met James Mitchell, who was the mechanic who came to my aid. He was engaged to Bradley Winchester, too, heir to Winchester Technologies, and my father's handpicked choice for my husband. "Looks like your timing belt's shot," he said, wiping his hands on his faded jeans in a beat-up tow truck with a smile that made my heart skip a beat. "I can fix it, but it will take a few hours." His straightforward brown eyes and the way he described everything without being condescending convinced me to wait in his tiny garage rather than. Over cups of awful coffee from the vending machine, I made the decision to contact Uber, which forever transformed my life. I learned that James wasn't just any mechanic. He had excelled in engineering school and graduated first in his class. He could have accepted a comfortable corporate position, but he preferred using his hands to solve problems and create things. Better, his eyes were sparkling when he told me, "Life's too short to spend it doing something just because it looks good on paper." For the first time, someone had put into words exactly how I've been feeling my entire life. Coffee followed by dinner, then stolen moments whenever I could escape my suffocating world. For 6 months, I lived a double life, a society princess by day and a melancholy by night. But James never inquired about my family's wealth or attempted to impress me with upscale dining or pricey presents. Instead, he showed me the joy of small things like midnight drives along the coast, picnics in hidden parks, and lots of laughter. Knew it couldn't go on forever, and our mansion's charity event was the tipping moment. As my mother paraded me around like a prize, Bradley was babbling on about merger tactics to everyone who would listen. Following the wedding that she criticized to yet another group of people, Thoroughbred Charlotte will be taking over the East Coast operations. Socialites, the Winchesters and Hamiltons envisioned what might be possible. Tears were flowing down my cheeks as I mumbled into the phone, "I can't marry Bradley. I can't be who they want me to be." I felt like I was suffocating, so I excused myself and ran to the garden, my shaky fingers already dialing James' number. James remained quiet for a. Charlotte was the lady I fell in love with that night, and it changed everything. The next morning, I strolled into my father's study with my heart racing, but my determination unwavering. "I must tell you something, Daddy." My voice trembled a little. "I can't marry Bradley because I'm in love with someone else." The subsequent explosion was nuclear. When I told my father that James wanted a different life than the one he had planned for him, he yelled and slammed his fist down on his mahogany desk. "My daughter, Hamilton, is in love with a Greek monkey, and he is an engineer." His face turned crimson. "Daddy is quite intelligent. If you only meet him, you won't be able to hear my father's voice. Have broken glass, you will marry Bradley as scheduled, or you can disregard your trust fund and job status. Everything is that obvious." I straightened up and channeled a strength I was unaware I possessed. Crystal clear. Leaving that study was the most difficult thing I had ever done, and I could feel my mother's frantic sobs and my father's dangers as I packed a little bag and left the only house I had ever known. The whispers of the housekeeping staff followed me. James was waiting for me outside his small flat, his face filled with worry. When I told him what had happened, he attempted to talk me out of it. "Your entire life, Charlotte, you were forfeiting your inheritance and your family." You can't do that for me." The following few months were a crash course in reality. I moved into James' one-bedroom flat, got a job as an entry-level business consultant at a small firm, and learned how to live on a budget. It wasn't easy, but for the first time in my life, I finally started living my life again. I kissed him to silence him. James and I grew stronger with each challenge, and when we decided to get married, we organized a modest ceremony at a nearby location. My parents' attempts to get me to wake up ranged from emotional manipulation to outright threats, freezing my accounts, canceling my credit cards, and even trying to get me to accept my new job. My mother texted me the morning of the wedding, saying, Your father and I will be attending one last chance to fix this mistake." My heart raced as it should have, but James squeezed my hand and said, "It's your call, love, whatever you want." There was no designer dress, no society photographers, just us and a few close friends. Despite everything, they remained my parents, so when I walked down the makeshift aisle in my plain white dress from a department store, I saw him right away standing at the back. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, and my father appeared to have swallowed something sour. Neither of them moved to join the Charlotte, darling. My mother's voice was filled with desperation as she said, "It's not too late. Bradley would still take you back. Think about what you're throwing away." My father went right to the chase, saying, "This is your last chance. Stay with this person, young woman, and you won't ever see ya. Do you wish to live in poverty with every bit of your inheritance?" I glanced at James, who was talking and joking with our friends in his rental suit, and then I glanced at my parents, who were ensnared in their world of luxury and expectations. I made it obvious that I wanted them to be happy because James makes me happy. If you can't see that, then perhaps we. My father's face turned that dangerous shade of purple again, and he spat, turning on his heel. My mother hesitated for a second, then rushed after him as they walked off. "I don't need your money or you in our lives." I leaned into James to observe my history as he appeared by my side, putting an arm around my waist. "You okay?" It's never better to walk away. We had settled into our lives 6 months prior, working hard and loving even more. James kept working at his garage while attending night school for his master's degree, and I put myself into my consulting business, establishing my own clientele. We were genuinely content, despite having to keep an eye on our expenditures and use coupons. James had withheld something from me that had the potential to completely upend my existence once more. Everything changed on a seemingly typical Friday night. I was eager to surprise James with takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant when I arrived home early from work, but our apartment was empty and there was a hastily written letter on the counter. It wasn't unusual for James to work late, love you, but lately something felt different. He had been preoccupied with mysterious phone calls and working strange hours, and I felt a knot in my stomach as my thoughts drifted to dark places. Was history repeating itself? Was I going to lose everything again? I couldn't sit still, so I decided to deliver food to him in the garage, but it was already dark when I arrived. Just as panic began to set in, my phone buzzed with a text from a known number, and my hands trembled as I dialed James' number straight to voicemail because his beat-up pickup wasn't in its normal location. "Mrs. Mitchell, please visit 1875 Highland Avenue right now. This concerns your—" My heart stopped, spouse. With shaking fingers, I entered the address into my GPS and drove through the darkened city, imagining the worst. Highland Avenue was in the industrial district, miles from James's garage. The GPS directed me to a huge contemporary building with sleek glass walls, security gates that automatically opened as I got closer, and I was led to an underground parking garage by a uniformed front desk guard. He nodded respectfully to Mrs. Mitchell, and he took the executive lift to the top floor. What happened next was that the lift opened into a gorgeous office suite with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city, and he was standing at a glass desk with his. James returned to me, but this time he was not the James I knew. Instead of the beat-up trousers and oil-stained t-shirt, he was wearing a perfectly fitted suit that most likely cost more than our monthly rent. When he turned around, his warm, familiar smile was tinged with anxiety. Charlie whispered softly, "I think it's time I told you," using his unique moniker for me. Things before he could go on. The office door flew open, revealing my mother, father, and Bradley Winchester Chai in a scene straight out of my worst nightmare. "What is this?" My father thundered, his face already turning that familiar shade of purple. Security said Charlotte was heading up here. "What are you doing in the CEO's office, you?" Mechanic James, who is actually Mr. Hamilton, the CEO, adjusted his tie and walked around the desk. Bradley's mouth hung wide unattractively. My mother clutched a chair for support, and my father, for the first time in my life, was silent. James Mitchell, the founder and CEO of Mitchell Innovations. Unable to speak, my mother stumbled, "You're a mechanic?" James grinned and took my hand. "Yes, my first business was a chain of car repair shops that I established with a loan from my college professor, but my primary emphasis is Mitchell Innovations, a tech company that specializes in revolutionary electric vehicle batteries, which is what those late nights are all about." My mind was racing while we were finishing up our new prototype in the garage, so I had to ask why he told me. I just made the Forbes 30 Under 30 list, James said softly, turning to face me. Every woman I dated was only interested in my money and status, but you fell in love with me when I was just a mechanic and you gave up everything for me. I needed to be certain. Mitchell Innovations, the company that recently revolutionized electric vehicle battery technology and with which every major automaker is vying for partnerships, is finally catching up, my father muttered, his business mind. James nodded, and our market valuation hit $122 billion last week. Not quite. James has been creating an empire right under their noses, and now James continued his speech with a sharper edge. Hamilton Industries turf, but we're getting there. I couldn't help but grin at my father's expression after all those months of looking down on my poor husband. I want to talk about how you handled your daughter, who by. My father's face went white when she married me, and she went on to become one of Mitchell Innovations' biggest shareholders. For years, Hamilton Industries has been attempting to enter the electric car industry. Having a relationship with Mitchell Innovations would have changed everything. Now you can see my father blustered while attempting to regain. James's voice was steel wrapped in silk, and we were just trying to get Charlotte fired by making her cry herself to sleep for weeks. Daddy, I finally found my voice. You always taught me that Hamiltons never settle for second best, and I married the most intelligent, kind, and I've never known a more successful man, and I accomplished it without being aware of any of this Charlotte sweetheart stuff. My mother moved forward with her arms extended, but we were mistaken. I gazed about the magnificent workplace before turning to Jan, my amazing husband, who had allowed me to sustain myself and grow stronger. I'm at home, Mom, but if you must embrace us on our terms if you wish to be a part of our lives. No more control or manipulation. My dad appeared to be choking on something really disagreeable. And what about Hamilton Industries? James grinned and said, Sir, we've actually received other proposals for exclusive partnerships from your competitors, but I thought given that you want to discuss it as equals, we could try something else. The following hour was bizarre. My mother worried over my awful flat and insisted that we move into a good house, while my father and James discussed business. Bradley had slunk away someplace, most likely to lick his wounds later that day. I finally addressed James with the question that had been bothering me. Why do you continue to work in the garage and live this way when you have billions of dollars? That night in our tiny flat. These months with you have been the happiest of my life. We made it. James pulled me near, and the garage kept me anchored by reminding me where I started and this flat. Tears filled my eyes as we spent hours together without any silver spoons or trust money. I love you, cunning billionaire, he grinned. I love you too, fugitive. After that night, Harris changed, but not in the ways that many might anticipate. We moved into a modest home that we jointly selected, and I became the head of Mitchell Innovations charity. Our resources are being used by the foundation to support other young entrepreneurs. James continues to teach mechanical skills to impoverished youngsters at his former garage. My parents are making an effort, though, and while Mom continues to make overt references to the need for trust funds for their grandchildren, Dad has grown to truly respect James and his weekly business meetings frequently devolve into drawn-out conversations about everything from philosophy to vintage cars. However, I finally realized what James meant when he said that life is too short to live it on paper. Sometimes the best things disguise themselves as broken Ferris wheels and coffee from vending machines, but the best part occasionally occurs when we take a drive by our former apartment or stop by our favorite takeout restaurant. In the end, love doesn't care about bank accounts or company empires. It cares about who you are when everything else is taken away. And we are just Charlotte and James, who still looks at me the same way he did when he was just a mechanic and I was just a renegade Harris. James, a fugitive and mechanic, we found each other thanks to Harris, who discovered something greater than billions.